The man that she ultimately identified was 46-year-old Jeffrey Thomas Willis. On the morning of May 17th, 2016, Jeffrey was arrested and charged with kidnapping Madison. And it was very nice to see that for once, a terrible crime was actually getting justice. But the story doesn't end here. Jeffrey's name wasn't one that was totally unfamiliar to the police. They just didn't even realize it yet. As it turns out, Jeffrey was actually someone who the police had interviewed years before, back when they were looking into Jessica's disappearance. Now, this is what they knew about Jeffrey. He was a furniture factory worker at the time of Jessica's disappearance, and he was a regular customer at the gas station. Which, think back to Jessica's case. Her co-workers described her as being someone who was very friendly to her regulars. So even though they were customers, she saw many of the regulars almost, as friends. They were also able to discover that Jeffrey owned a silver minivan, just like the one that witnesses had described as being suspicious at the gas station around the time of her disappearance. So during that initial investigation, they had interviewed him. He claimed that yes, he was a regular at the gas station, and yes, he knew who Jessica was. He even admitted that on the night that Jessica went missing, he was at the gas station. But he said that he just knew of her. He didn't actually know her on a personal level, only in a way where you come to recognize the workers at a place that you go to often. So the investigators asked if they could take a look at his van, and apparently he let them. But the van was clean. And not in a suspiciously clean and overly smells like bleach kind of way. It was just a regular van that looked well taken care of. They were able to find that he had just recently bought the van about a month prior, so when I do also say that it looked as good as new, it really wasn't an exaggeration. Which the investigators felt was kind of the opposite of what would have been expected if Jeffrey had been the one to take Jessica. I mean, there was blood outside of the gas station near that back door, so clearly she was bleeding, and likely she would have bled in the van. But it was totally clean. And really, you could go back and forth all day long asking, well, what if he put a tarp down? What if he got rid of that tarp? What if this? What if that? But at the end of the day, those are just a bunch of what ifs. I mean, the point was there wasn't anything suspicious about the van. And apparently, Jeffrey also had an alibi, though I wasn't able to find out exactly what his alibi was. Now, interestingly enough, this whole connection with Jeffrey being someone the investigators had initially looked into with Jessica's disappearance, it wasn't even brought up by the investigators. It was Jeffrey himself who brought it up when they were interviewing him about Madison's case, which, by the way, he denied having any involvement in. But the investigators decided, all right, let's pivot. You want to talk about Jessica's case? Let's talk about Jessica's case. So they asked him a bunch of questions, and keep in mind, it had been 3 years since Jessica's disappearance at this point. It wasn't an insanely long amount of time to recall events if you're telling the truth, but it was definitely long enough to forget your lies. So right away, the investigators noted a lot of inconsistencies with Jeffrey's story. The new 2016 version was not matching up with the 2013 version. And then Jeffrey started getting really upset and really defensive, overly defensive, especially when they told him that he wasn't being consistent and that they were going to get warrants for his van and his house. And that wasn't just a threat. They really were getting the warrants drafted up, and they very quickly were approved. So the first thing that they searched was his van, and it painted a very scary picture. Inside of the van, he had this little secret compartment that was supposed to be well hidden, but they found it. And inside of the compartment was a padded lockbox. Never a good sign, right? And inside of this lockbox, there was bondage equipment. Also syringes, multiple vials of insulin, and a laminated diagram of the human body. It was almost like he had made a literal how-to guide of where to inject someone, with obvious malicious intent, right? Because too much insulin to a non-diabetic, it can absolutely be deadly. But that's not all. He also had another lockbox under his driver's seat. And inside that lockbox was a gun. Now, right away, you might be thinking, okay, perfect. That's probably the gun that he tried to use on Madison, and they're going to track it, all of that. But the gun holds even more significance, because that gun was very quickly identified as also being the same one with the exact same ammunition that was tied to Jessica and Rebecca's crime scenes.